Welcome to Women We Should Know with international speaker, mindset reset mentor, author, and your host, Leslie Michaels. With audacious honesty and candor, the Women We Should Know podcast presents the wisdom and life-empowering insights of women who are the embodiments of innovation and social evolution. Please join Leslie as she shares potent conversations that will inspire your personal and professional evolutions. Welcome to Women We Should Know.
Welcome back to Women We Should Know, the podcast where we consistently bring you the voices, the innovation, the penetrating insights of women who do not color inside the lines, who refuse to get in boxes that were created by someone else. And the most amazing thing about these women that I have the privilege to bring to you is that as they are carving new paths, they leave the light on so that we can all see a new way to travel, a new way to be, and a new way to share. And it is always indeed my privilege. And today we have an incredible woman. I know, I say that every time, but it is always true. So there we go. Dr. Sacha Joseph-Mathews is the Assistant Dean for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, as well as a marketing professor in the Eberhart School of Business at the University of the Pacific in Stockton, California. She holds a Bachelor of Arts in Mass Communications from the University of the West Indies, Mona campus, a Master's of Science degree in Tourism and Hospitality Management, and a PhD in Business Administration with a specialization in marketing. Professor Joseph-Mathews has been working and teaching in undergraduate, graduate, and executive education for over 20 years. And in addition to her academic work at the University of the Pacific, Dr. Mathews runs an active marketing and DE&I consultancy where she advises, coaches, and trains boards, executives, supervisors, and frontline employees, both domestically and abroad. And there's so much more I could share, but I'm going to dive right in because I want her to come into this conversation and tell us more about who she is and what she's doing. Hello, Sacha. I am so pleased to have you with us today.
Hi, Leslie. I'm so excited to be here with you, joining to talk about these interesting things that you've been talking about with all these various diverse women.
And now here you are, one more powerful, brilliant, diverse woman. So I have this little tradition.
Mm-hmm.
In the beginning of every conversation, I like to ask, what has inspired you today?
What has inspired me today? I mean, so many things, right? You know, I grew up in a household with a mom and dad pushing me to greatness, right? So mediocrity was never an option. I went to an all-girl high school that really was designed for Black women. And I think I met amazing teachers and mentors and peers there that also pushed me to greatness. Mm-hmm. And I think the other part of it that we often don't discuss is that I have a partner who allows me to be myself, my authentic self, and who is not intimidated by my desire to be excellent in all that I do, and who grounds me in many instances as I take on these challenges, and who allows me the opportunity to do great things, because when I'm not at home, he holds down the fort, right? And that's not only him, but I have an extended family, my sisters and parents that live close by that are able to do that, because I think often we don't think about that, right? When with women in particular who are in relationships, it's sometimes it can be difficult. A lot of women are not able to attain greatness because they are with someone who doesn't want them to achieve greatness, who is really has taken on their life's work to make them small. And that has not been my situation at any point in my life. And so that is an inspiration for me and a blessing for me, and one that I wish upon all women everywhere. Because we live in a society where we don't always recognize how oppressive those around us can be. And not just, oppression is not always coming from outside. It can often come from internal forces and sources that we don't recognize in ourselves, in our own lives. So I think for me, the inspiration has always been close to home. But also, and this is huge, and I often have this discussion with other women, growing up in a society where I often saw people that looked like me who achieved greatness, allowed me a fluidity with ambition, because I did not self-impose arbitrary limits to what I could achieve just because I wasn't able to visualize it, right?
Right.
And so being able to see it on my doorstep, in my family, in my friends of my family members, my mom's friends, my aunt's friends, and in society was huge in helping to create who I was. And so once I got to the US, because as you know, I was born and raised in the Caribbean, Trinidad and Tobago.
Yes.
And so once I came to the US and I started to encounter people, institutions, these ideas that wanted to limit me, there was nowhere for it to take root, because
you had no internal fertile ground for it.
There was no fertile ground for it to take root. And so I just pressed on, and I continued to be my authentic self, despite there being people all along the way who wanted to limit, block, box, whatever it was. And so that's why I think being your authentic self, it's easy for us to say, be your authentic self. But for so many women, they have not been nurtured into a realization, a culturalization, a system, a reality where they could feel as if being their authentic self would be rewarding and would yield benefits.
I find that there's all this conversation about being your authentic self, and women such as you or I, we understand what we're saying. But what I'm finding so much of is women who really don't even know what that means.
Yes.
And so therefore, they don't know how to take that internal journey to find that.
Right. And they may even think that being their authentic self is to jump on board things that really don't represent who they are, but maybe in vogue now, or seem to be popular, or maybe they're even hearing that this is what an independent woman does. You know what I mean? And it's kind of unfortunate, because that there is a journey to that authentic self, right? One does not typically wake up as one's authentic self. And then even if you were blessed with that strength of character, and from a young child, you always knew who you were. As we go through life and engage in relationships, it is natural for us to take on these personas of people around us, or who we think they want us to be. And so this journey towards authenticity is, it's not like this road with a beginning and an end, and you just reach there and boom, you're your authentic self.
There you are.
You know what I mean?
Forever.
It does take evolution.
Yes.
And stay authentic. takes work as well.
That's right. It's really not a destination. It really is a journey. And those words have become somewhat passe, and yet they are still true.
Absolutely. Because I think too, that for me, when I left Trinidad as a teenager to do my undergrad in Jamaica, I thought I knew who I was, and I thought I knew who my authentic self was. And then I got into Jamaican society, and I really evolved as an individual. And then I got back to Trinidad, and I thought I was kind of misplaced, because now I had to be this person when I was in Jamaica, and this person probably had to evolve to become a different person when I was in Trinidad, back into life there. And then when I came over here, I had to really change and think about, how do I adapt and adjust to American society. And being in Florida was very different from being in California. So I think, what is that authentic self? What it looks like changes, evolves, and it's a journey to keep on the path that you want to be on, because so many people might try to tell you that your authentic self is not good or bad, or this is who you really should be, or and when you're a minority person of color, that journey is also interesting and unique and challenging as well.
I know I have my tips. What are the tips or insights you give to women to recognize what is the authentic self, to help them to either initiate or progress on that personal journey?
I think, don't be afraid of growth, right? Because evolution takes some pains, right? If you think of any animal, even like a caterpillar, changing and morphing into a butterfly, requires restraint and restriction for quite a while, right? When you're in this cocoon, right? So you don't just go to sleep one day and next morning you wake up and you're this fabulous butterfly, right? It takes time and energy in this evolution. And I think we as individuals, the same thing happens. Like, we almost have to go through things and understand what it requires of us to evolve into our authentic self. And so, don't be afraid of that growth. At the same time, I would say that sometimes you have to recognize that some partnerships, some friendships, some relationships are not healthy for maintaining authenticity or coming into your authenticity. And so sometimes you're going to have to shed those, right?
Right.
Because
so
it's
many of those. So many of
many
those.
times, right? And then also, this is something that I was just having a conversation with a friend about, because, for a lot of Black women, the pandemic was an opportunity for us to not have to. So there's something in Black culture, we often talk about code switching, especially those of us who have had to work in corporate or predominant environments where we're a minority in that environment.
Right.
And we code switch. And so I have an office version of Sacha and I have an at-home version of Sacha. And I think most individuals don't recognize, one, what is involved in this office version of Sacha, because I think most people say, well, I have an office version of Leslie and I have a home version of Leslie. But I think that it in many instances, when you are the minority in a majority culture, that change from home to office is quite significant. It involves so many components. I have to change what I laugh at. I have to change how I sound. I have to change what I can say, when I can say it, how I say it, my tone of voice, my level, my pitch. I have to change almost my way of thinking, my way of analysis, everything when I go into the setting, and then change it back when I go to another setting. And it is exhausting and very trying. And so the pandemic allowed a lot of women of color in particular to get a break from that constant metaphoric, you constantly having to go back and forth in this code switching. And so, and you don't have to explain why, Sacha, why are you wrapping your hair? Saying, oh, what is that head wrap about? And why did you choose that? And what does it mean? And what happened with your hair? We didn't have to go through those conversations anymore. Instead, we would just come into a meeting, have the meeting, leave the meeting. Right? And that was so powerful to so many Black women that the idea of giving it up and going back to work in an office made them even leave their place of work and find remote work. And so I say that to say that sometimes the institutions that we are working for, the organizations, the companies, the corporations, play a role in inhibiting our authenticity. And so we also sometimes have to think about, is it worth it? What opportunities might be better suited and matched with our authentic self? That would allow us. And I have been blessed because I work in academia. But even before I worked in academia, when I worked in corporate in Trinidad, I was really blessed with working for organizations and having bosses that recognized saw the benefits in allowing me to be me.
Right.
And I don't think that everyone has that blessing and that opportunity.
No, I'm absolutely sure they don't. I read an article in Forbes or Harvard Business Review, I don't recall which, a few months ago, speaking to the increase in the percentage of women-founded, women-run businesses since COVID, and the highest percentage of increase was among Black women.
Yes.
And so do you see this as a very reasonable response to these challenges you were talking about, this switching that has to take place? Because I can't imagine what that is, and I never even thought about it, but when you say it, of course it's true. How did I not notice that? And that's the problem. Right. When we don't experience something, when you're melanin challenged like me, then you don't have the opportunity to have those deep insights. So I appreciate you sharing that and to go forward into this explosion of women-founded, women-run businesses by Black women.
Yeah. I think it was a combination of things that was happening. I think a lot of Black women have always been super creative and wanting to start their own businesses, and many feeling trapped in corporate America because they didn't see that they had other choices, opportunities, and funding to take the leap.
Funding, that's it.
Funding in particular. And I think during the pandemic, there were a lot of business loans that were being made available that never existed before.
That's right.
For women of color, that would allow them to jump ship and still have, and they wouldn't have, because we don't have access to 100,000 from family or friends to start a business, right? Or have that money sitting in a bank somewhere that is our life savings that we could tap into. Often we don't, because we, if you look, and even like myself as a professor, if I look at we were having this conversation with some of my colleagues, we were talking about, Black women, and not just female professors, but where we start in terms of our capital abilities from a funding versus many of our colleagues. We look at our loan levels, and we look at what we are able to do in that first academic job, buying our first home, and those kinds of things that may seem logical to other groups that are much more difficult and trying for us. So I think a lot of Black women in particular, funding was a big challenge, and economic stability was a challenge. Maybe they might have the funding to do it. Somehow they could access the loans, but then they were concerned that I'm leaving a 6-figure job that is stable, that
Right.
will be there, and I'm taking this plunge. And I don't have anybody in my family who's ever done this before.
Right.
I don't have mentors to help
Don't
me.
have
And
a model.
I don't have a model. I don't have a roadmap. This is completely uncharted territory.
Yes.
And so I think the frustrations were not different. I think the opportunities changed during the pandemic. And
Yes.
so a lot of women who before would have been like, I guess I have to deal with all the micro and macroaggressions today, like I did yesterday. A lot of women said, hell no. That's the first thing. The second thing, and I think this is a big thing, generations, millennials and Zers are much more likely to say, I'm screwing this system and I'm charting my own path.
That's right.
I
talk to them every week.
Exactly. In ways,
especially women.
Yes. In ways that boomers and Xers like myself would have been much more hesitant to do. And so I think younger folks would jump right into this and say, well, what do we have to lose? Let's try it. Why not? And so you see a lot of them going out and charting this new path in ways that I think Xers and boomers would have been really afraid to do. And then I think also in the pandemic, with this great migration, a lot of women Black women who might have been secure in their jobs, started thinking about, you know what, they like the flexibility of being at home with their family. They like the flexibility of not having to be just attached to the cell phone and constantly on the go and traveling to all these places. And they think a change might be something good. And so why not? Maybe I have money saved up and maybe I was thinking I would wait 3-4 more years to do it. But now I decide now is the time. So I think it's this kind of...
And that's really essential. And there are women who will not acknowledge this truth, and a lot of men who it just goes over their head. But women, unlike men, they don't just have that one full-time 6-figure corporate income. Then they come home and they have another 2 or 3 or 4 jobs. They have the home, they have the kids, they have caring for the elders, they have all of this other unpaid labor, which in 2020, a year when we were in the middle of a global pandemic, if women had been paid for their unpaid labor, that would have come to $14.1 trillion with a T, trillion dollars. And so this is another important factor for women. And Black women experience this even more severely than white women.
Right. And I often say partly because, we always have half of our bodies, not just one leg, back with our families.
Yes.
We are supporting a cousin or a sister or a brother or a parent, always. Every single Black woman that I know, they are doing something with their family members, especially Black professionals who are excelling. And so that means that when we get home, we start our second shift for those of us that have families and so forth and so on to take care of. But we also, as we're doing that second shift, the first shift has not ended. Right? And so it's super challenging. And I think a lot of us just decided we have seen people who have gotten sick. And I think that's the other thing. We have seen people who died in the pandemic. And we decided, if I die tomorrow, if COVID takes me and I die tomorrow, what have I done? Have I realized my dream? What do I have to show for it? I've been working so hard for this organization and they've been taking my blood, sweat, and tears. But what have I done for me? And I think people were not afraid to take the leap.
Yes, where is my fulfillment level? If this is all there is, where was my fulfillment moment, my fulfillment level? And so many women said, oh, wait a minute. No, I forgot. I missed that right turn. I missed that left turn. Yeah. Dr. Mathews, would you please speak to our listeners about micro and macro aggressions? Because I know I've had this conversation so many times, and I'm just a beginner. I don't claim to know a whole lot about this, but what's shocking to me is how many people know nothing about it. They don't even know what the words mean.
Nothing about it. Now, the thing is that I think often, you know, when I do a lot of unconscious bias training. I do these workshops in all kinds of agencies. And often I say to folks, I think that we have this idea in our mind that we will not admit about unconscious bias because we think that makes us a racist human. And we don't want to be seen as a racist, misogynistic, whatever is the ism. We don't want to be associated with that ism. So we deny our, you know, our biases. And I think we often, in order to see a bias, we want to see it represented in probably a macroaggression, right? So unless somebody's burning a steak in our front yard, use the N-word, did, you know, some kind of very clear macroaggression, we say, but, you know, this person is not really, that's not really an issue because you don't have anybody doing that, right? You're not surrounded by racist, whatever. And so what is the problem?
Right.
But, you know, microaggressions, are like 1,000 paper cuts, right? And over time, and this is something I think I often have a conversation with my Caribbean people about, because often when you talk to people of color, or not necessarily someone of color, but a Caribbean person about racism or any kind of ism in the ageism, ableism in the United States, they often will say, oh, it's not such a big deal. Why are people making such a big deal out of it? What is the problem? You know, but then when they come here and stay for an extended period, now you start seeing.
Now they understand.
And that is because of the 1,000 paper cuts. And so what I often say, little things, little tiny things where that would you, it was a non-issue. I give you, and I often use this as my example, right? So I'm in my office and I'm behind my desk, minding my own business, and somebody comes and knocks on my door and says, hi, I'm looking for Dr. Mathews. Can you tell me where she is? And that right there is the microaggression. And people would say, how is that a microaggression? Because my colleagues would say, Sasha, what are you talking about? You know, they probably don't believe you are the professor because you look so young. And I would say almost all of these students have never had the experience of walking into one of these offices and the person sitting behind the desk in full suit wasn't the professor. So it's not as if they're accustomed to coming into a situation where the person sitting behind the desk is usually the secretary, and then that person will find the real professor. That's not the situation. That's not the reality. The reality is when you come into that room, that's the professor. That's their reality every time they walk into an office. And yet they come into my office and would say, can you tell me where Dr. Mathews is? And so one time I went to this conference. It was a education conference for education, business educators, and there seemed to be quite a number of African American professors. And I had lunch with a few of them, and I was explaining my situation, and they all related exactly to that situation: young, older, male, female. We were a diverse group with the exception of our color or our ethnicity. And so that made me think to myself, so what is it? So I asked a young lady who came into my office one time, I said, what is it about me that makes you think, well, the real Slim Shady, please stand up? And of course, that's an Eminem reference, which she did not get. And so the whole thing was kind of lost on her. But my point to her was, normally if you come into an office, you just make an assumption about the person sitting behind the desk. But you come into my office, and that assumption is somehow interrupted. And you ask this question, which seems innocent enough, but in fact, it is a microaggression. And for me, as an individual, constantly having to deal with small misunderstandings or
I would call them diminishments.
Right. Where
I mean,
people
let's just call it what it is.
what it is, right? So constantly being in a space where people ask you at the table, so what's your role? Right? As opposed to understanding what your role, or people having the gumption to have certain conversations with you that they would never have with other folks, or just constantly little itty bitty things. Those are microaggressions. Those are microaggressions. And I think for me as an individual, I would say the challenge I think sometimes people have with understanding microaggression is that they often misdiagnose it because of intent, right? So they will say, but I didn't mean to be offensive. And a microaggression does not lose its aggression whether it was intended or not.
Right.
So the fact that that young lady, maybe she wasn't trying to diminish me. I would say that she absolutely, when she looked at me, really wanted to know where the real Dr. Mathews was. But that does not negate the fact that it was diminishing to me.
It does not negate the fact, and it is in a society where we are continually, hopefully, some of us working to become more conscious. That's a moment, I say, for all of our listeners, when we get to look at ourselves and say, where did that come from? Instead of turning to you and being dependent on you to point out that it is a microaggression, when we find ourselves in those positions, being able to look inside, because making a mistake is not the issue.
No.
Not learning from the mistake, not owning the mistake.
Right.
That's where it becomes an issue.
Right. Absolutely. And I think also recognizing that you can have an active and a passive microaggression, right?
Yes.
So you can, you can talk over someone in a meeting. You can claim someone's idea as your own. You can dismiss someone's idea as insignificant and unimportant, and yet recognize its greatness in the voice of another. I would say those are all active. But then, passive might be nonetheless still a microaggression, where you choose never to have coffee with this particular individual, right? You never go to that individual to bounce an idea off of them. Or you never give this person an opportunity to take a lead on a project, right? So all these things or you just assume competence with someone and question competency with someone else, right? So all of these can be considered microaggression. And then I think, the challenge of microaggressions is not in the moment, it's the accumulative effect.
Of course.
Because what happens to Sacha after she's constantly experiencing these microaggressions is that I lose my inclination to give people the benefit of the doubt. And then people say, oh, but why? So I lose my ability to let this one go, because this is now the 10th in a series, right?
Right.
And so that's why I say the 1,000 paper cuts, because one paper cut on its own, very limited effect, but 1,000.
1,000.
1,000.
Now, I want to circle back to the topic of authentic self.
Yes.
Because and this is a big drive, we know that this is a big catchphrase in our society, and part of the vernacular now is to be your authentic self. 10 years ago, we'd only started to hear of it. But what I would invite our listeners to consider is, how can you be an authentic self if you aren't willing to recognize your internal biases, your unconscious biases, your unconscious misogyny when it comes up? Because being able to say, Oh, yes, I said that. I did. I actually heard myself say that. I'm sorry that I heard myself say that. That is an authentic action. That is one of the keys to becoming that authentic self, is being able to own these well-trained, microaggressive actions that litter our lives.
I would say, Leslie, it goes beyond the actions as well, right?
Of
Because
course.
many of us have almost kind of trained ourselves to a certain extent for the action, right? So maybe, excuse me, we may not say something, but by golly, we're thinking it, right?
Oh, such a wonderful point. Thank you.
And that is it. And so I always use the example for myself, like, I don't think I ever really thought of myself as a feminist. I just had certain thoughts about feminism, right? So I never kind of categorized myself. You know what I am? I just lived. And people might categorize me as that, but I never really thought of myself as that. But I remember getting on this plane and seeing a female pilot and thinking, oh my God, I love this. I wish all pilots were female pilots. It's incredible, right? This is an excellent thing, and I am so proud and excited to be on this plane. And I can't remember, I feel as if I was heading to Egypt, but it was somewhere far. So either Egypt or China. And I remember just being elated and sitting down and giving praise and thanks. And the first sign of turbulence, my first thought was, wow, I wonder how much training this woman has and how much experience this woman has flying this plane. That was the first thought that came into my mind. And immediately I said to myself, wow, Sasha, bias much, right? And that was my thought that I have to own.
That's right.
And immediately, what was my first thought as soon as we got into trouble? How much experience does this woman have flying planes? Like, this is a long distance that we're going here.
Right.
And so I would say, like, your authentic self, that's the evolution, right?
Right.
That you grew up, and that's why I always say, if you're breathing, you're biased. And I really want us to move away from this idea of unconscious biases being bad.
Absolutely.
Because it's human. Now, I think that a lot of people have unconscious and conscious bias, and they want to kind of peg it as if it's unconscious when we really know it's not, right?
Right.
But I think we all have, there are 150 different types of biases. So there's no shortage of biases to go around. So I would say we all have these biases, and we have, as we are working towards correcting them, we have to be honest. As you said, we have to be honest about our authenticity and the fact that we have these thoughts, even if we manage to be very politically correct in the things that we say on a day-to-day basis.
The things that we say. That's right. That's right. I could go on and on and on and continue to learn from you for the rest of the day, as I'm sure could our listeners, but they're going to cut me off here in a minute. I want to thank you for coming and sharing your brilliant insights and your wisdom with me and with our listeners today.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to have this wonderful conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
I did as well. I learned a great deal. And now, listeners, I'm going to do for you what I always do. Go to the program notes, and I will have any information Dr. Mathews has provided for you in terms of how to connect with her, how to connect with her work. It'll be right there for you in the same place it always is. So go and find that. The other thing is, I cannot, in the farthest reaches of my imagination, conceive that everyone listening didn't receive handfuls of wisdom and nuggets to take away with them today. Now, the thing about those is, if you stick them in your pocket because you're jogging or you're driving, and you just kind of stick them in your pocket, the pocket of your mind, and you don't pay any attention, they don't serve you. They don't serve you. So here is my continuing recommendation. I know those of you who've been with me for a while have heard this over and over, but bear with me. I'm going to say it again. When you get home, write them down, each one on a separate piece of paper or post it, and then just leave them on your desk, on your dining room table, your bar, wherever it is. You'll come back across them in 1, 2, 4 days. And that's the moment. That's this golden moment when you can revisit that and say, why did that speak to me? What did that awaken in me? What is the gift in this that caused me to write it down? And then you are more than you were the day before. So thank you so much, Sacha, for coming and being with us.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. And for all of your listeners, I just want to say, be you, the world will come around.
That's beautiful. Thank you. And as the rest of you go through your day, just remember, you truly are stronger and wiser than you know.